We're gonna try to do a process of M42 using all free software, using Roger Clark's software and methods. I've only done this like one time before, so I'm still learning too, but this is a reference hopefully that some of you will find useful. And yeah, let's get started. So these are not my images. These are from a guy on astronomyforum.net. So we're just going to be using the subs and the darks today because I've looked at the stack with the bias before and there were some weird artifacts, and I'm going to try just using the subs and darks and see if that helps. Um, so first things first, open your light frames in DSS. Um, we can do a check all for now, and then we're gonna do load our dark files in. Uh, okay. Next in Deep Sky Stacker, we're gonna go in here. Let's go to advanced. I'm gonna bring this back down, and we're gonna try computing stars. See how many we get. Okay, that's not bad. I think that'll work fine at 20%. Let's try going up to 30 and seeing if we still get a decent number. The higher you go, the less time it will take in theory, but if you don't get enough, then you could get bad alignment. So I think we're just going to take it to 25%. I haven't inspected these frames. They look pretty good. So we're just going to say take the best 90%. That should be fine. Then we're going to go into our stacking parameters. Intermediate files. So the important thing here is that we're using Deep Sky Stacker only to calibrate and register the frames. And so we're going to use a different little script to actually do the stacking for us. And so because of that, we want Deep Sky Stacker to actually save out a registered and calibrated file for each frame. And we're going to save those let's see here. Okay, so it's going to save it to the, I believe it'll save the intermediate files to the folder where the file list is. I'm going to change my temp directory to, let's see, how much space do I have on my drives right now? Yeah, okay, so we can use Astro, and let's just make a temp. Okay. Result, I like to use intersection, but I think that, when I'm just using DSS, I think for now we'll just use standard mode, and then we'll just crop out the stacking artifacts in post. Make sure you don't have align RGB channels checked here, and make sure that you have, if you click on this, make sure you're on no background calibration. That'll make sure that the stacked file retains the correct color data, which is important. This isn't going to matter because we're going to stack it in a different place anyway. For these darks, we only have 10, and so I think we'll just leave it on Kappa Sigma clipping for this. Let's actually see, what does it recommend here? Yeah, so I think since there's so little dark frames, I'm actually just going to go to an average. Normally you want to do more dark frames than just 10. Go to something like 30 or more, and you'll get a better result out of your dark frames. Alignment automatic is fine. We talked about intermediate files, so we're going to check create registered calibrated file for each light frame, where we're going to use there. And okay, so output in the file of folder list. So we're going to press cancel for now, and we're going to do save file list. We're going to kind of call this M42, and we're going to put it in, I created a folder called reg, and this is in theory where I want my registered and calibrated files to go. So I believe that if I save this file list here, then it'll save all the output files for me in that same folder. So if we go back to stacking, output, we don't, let's just leave create output file on. It might put these intermediate files in our temp folder. So I haven't done this version before, so we're just gonna see here. So I think that's it, and we're gonna press OK and OK and OK. And we're just gonna let this run. Alright, we're back, and DSS just finished. Don't bother with this. If you were going to use the DSS version, you'd go to save picture to file, make sure you're on TIFF, choose wherever you want to save it. Let's just call it 42. You want 32-bit rational integer, doesn't matter. Then you want to do embed adjustments, not apply adjustments. Save that. So that would be how you'd want to use DSS's version. But since we don't want to do that, we're going to close the DSS for now. We're going to go and look at, let's see, I guess it must have dumped it in my temp folder that I made. No? Where did it dump it? Hold on, I'm going to figure out how DSS works in a second. I'll be back. Right, okay, I figured it out. So it puts them in the same folder as the subs were in. So, alright, I think we can work with this actually. So, what we're going to do is, this is the part where we bring in Roger Clark's stuff. So you're going to have to download and install a thing called DaVinci, which is essentially like a image and data manipulation programming language used in astronomy. And it's made by ESU. It's fairly easy to install. Right now, for some reason, they had like the download link removed off the page, so I had to go dig it up. I'll put it link to it in the description. Download and install that, pretty easy, and then you go to Roger Clark's site, download his stuff. For now, we're going to use the command line to use this sigma clip average script. So we're going to launch our DaVinci command line, and then we're going to type in DaVinci. Actually, first we're going to do alright, I think this is going to be easiest actually if we copy our launch DaVinci badge file and our script and paste them in the same folder with our subs. Okay, now if we do launch DaVinci, and now we should be able to do DaVinci -f DaVinci.sigma clip average 3 pass. We're going to use a sigma value of 2.0, pretty standard. We're going to output as a PNG, and our images are going to be anything.reg.tiff, because our registered files are .reg. And we're going to hit enter. And DaVinci is not recognized. Interesting. Did I type it wrong? No. Alright, let me see if I can figure this out. Alright, so, pretty easy to fix, I hope. So this is the batch file I downloaded directly from Roger Clark's site. I don't want to run it, I want to edit it. Thank you very much. Okay. So, in this case, it wants DaVinci to be installed in c:/program files x86/DaVinci. If you download the newest version of DaVinci, that's not where it's located. It's located in program files /DaVinci-2.18, I believe. Let me make sure I got that right. Here we go. Program files DaVinci-2.18. Okay, and so this is the home folder. We'll do save, close that, close this, and try this again. DaVinci-f DaVinci.sigma clip average sigma of 2.0 and output PNG. Our images are star.reg.tiff. Alright, so it looks like it's off to the races. Let's see. Something didn't work right here. Error. Could not source file. DaVinci.sigma clip average. What's it called? DaVinci. Sigma clip average 3 pass. There you go. Sigma clip average 3 pass. I believe that should be it. Error. What do we get now? Okay, so it looks like DaVinci loaded properly. Error on reading file. Well, that's not a very helpful error at all. Let's see if I can figure this one out. Okay, so I took a break, came back. I believe I have this figured out. I had to do a little bit of modification to the script to get this working. So on Windows, it seems that you need to provide the full image path, the absolute image path to your images. I also added a new parameter called -o for output, and it allows you to specify what, where, and what you want your output to be called. And on Windows that also seems to be required because I don't know where the default directory of DaVinci is. I couldn't figure it out. And so even though it worked without this, I couldn't figure out where I put the output, so I sort of lost that. And so I'll upload this modified version and so you guys can use it, and we're gonna give this a shot, and hopefully it will be successful. And I'll be back. We'll start it up here, and I'll be back in a little bit when it's done, in theory. Okay, so it worked. It says writing output right where I wanted it. Got this. Okay, so now's the fun part. the next thing we need to do is let's open up Photoshop. And the output file that we just got, do not register, okay. The output file we just got is a PNG that you can read the explanation for why on Roger's page. Essentially, like, the values are like 2 times larger than Photoshop wants. So if we go to levels and we type in up here 128, then we now have our stacked image, and it looks pretty darn good, I'd say. Very darn good. Okay, so now we're going to do our initial pre-stretch corrections. So the first thing to do is to crop the image. So I think I'm going to come in to somewhere around here to crop out as much vignetting as possible, and zero in more on the subject. Okay. Whoops, didn't want to do that. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to do is try to remove as much light pollution and gradation as possible before we stretch. So the method that I've developed for doing this, I don't know if it's the best method. I'm still experimenting. But what I do is I come over here, I duplicate layer. I'm going to close this window for now because it's in the way. Okay, so we come over here, duplicate layer, and we're going to send it to a document new. And that's going to make us a new document with the same layer we just had. And now we're going to sample a color in the background that seems to be a representative of our light pollution. So I'm just going to sample this color, and then we're going to go up to Edit, Fill, and we're going to fill with foreground color. And now we're going to come up to Brightness Contrast. If you're in a newer version of Photoshop, then you're going to click the little Use Legacy thing down here. But since we're in CS2, it's already Legacy. And we can just do like probably about a -15. Somewhere between a -15 to a -25 will probably be best for what we're doing. So I'm going to try a -20. And basically, the reason that we're going to do this is because we're going to perform a subtract operation. And so what that's going to do is it's going to take the value of each pixel in this image and subtract the value from this image. And we don't want to clip out any of the small details. So if we accidentally sampled a color that was too bright, then we could be clipping out detail on the lower end of the spectrum. So to solve that, we're just going to subtract out from this image about 15, and we can always remove the extra light pollution later, in theory. So then we're going to come back to our original, go to Image, Apply Image, and change our source from our original image to Untitled 1. Change our blending mode to Subtract, and so from here, in order to make sure you haven't clipped anything, you can uncheck and check your preview and look at your histogram up here. So this is where the histogram was before, and now we're here. Just make sure that the bottom of the spike isn't pushed all the way to the left of the histogram. If it is, then you're subtracting too much. Okay, so from there we can click OK. And now we have this. The next thing we're going to try to do is get rid of as much gradient as possible, and I like to do this by doing an add operation, because by doing that you aren't going to ever lose or clip any data. And so instead of trying to subtract the center, I'm going to add to the edges. So the way I do that is we're going to duplicate this again to a new document. And this time we are going to grab the clone stamp tool and make it into a fairly large brush. And then we're going to just grab a sample from somewhere where you don't have your object, and you're just going to paint over any area. Try to stay as close, sample from as close of an area as possible to where you're painting over, to keep the gradient as much as you can that's present in the image. And just sample and paint out any areas that are especially unusually bright. So any really large DSOs are perfect candidates for this. Any super bright stars, etc. And you can just adjust the size of your brush. I'm hitting the open and close bracket keys on my keyboard. That's the default resize. So once you have it to a state that is fairly even, doesn't need to be perfect, we can go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I usually find that a value somewhere between 160 to 200 pixels, I like to do usually around 180, will give us a good result here. And I don't know how well this is going to be picked up in the video, but you just want to blur it until you get just the gradient, and you don't want to go too much higher than that. So just get it to a point where you see the gradient but not any detail, and you want it to be fairly smooth. So you don't want it to be, you'll see little banding lines. Make sure that those aren't super wavy and out of control, because then you're going to be subtracting detail that you brought in from cloning rather than actually the gradient. Okay, so hit OK to that. Then we're going to come up to Image, Adjustments, and invert the image. And now you can't really see much here, but if you look up here in the histogram, this is where the spike is. Sorry about that. This is where the spike is, and we want to bring that all the way down as far to the left as we can. So to do that, we're going to come up to Adjustments, and we're going to go to Brightness Contrast and bring our brightness down. You're probably going to have to do this a couple of times, if not 3. So down to Brightness Contrast again, all the way down. And make sure if you're on a previous version of Photoshop, you have Legacy ticked. Or on a later version of Photoshop, rather, you tick Legacy. And then we're going to go to Brightness Contrast again. And now you look at your histogram up there, and you bring it down as far as you can without actually clipping anything. Okay? And we're going to click OK. And now what we can do is come back to our original image and do Image, Apply Image again. And this time we're going to choose Untitled 2, and we're going to do a add operation. And as you can see, we're nixing much of the gradient in that image. And the other thing you can do is adjust slightly your offset here. So going higher is going to make your image brighter, and lower is going to make your image darker. As long as you adjust the brightness properly in the previous step, you should just be able to keep a 0 offset here. And next, I think we're ready to save this and put it through the color stretching process. So we're going to go to Save As, and we're going to save it as a TIFF file, and we're going to call this M42 stacked preprocessed. Okay, save that. And now that that's done, we can come back in here, and we now have this file. So the next step is we're gonna put away Photoshop for now. We don't need this anymore. We're gonna come in here, and this is the Color Stretch GUI, and you can download this from Roger Clark's site. I'll leave a link. actually, it was made by a different guy, but based on Roger's program. So this makes it fairly easy to adjust parameters. You don't have to use a command line. So we're just going to run this. Browse to our input file. In this case, we're using our TIFF M42 stacked preprocessed. And the defaults for this are probably fairly good for an image that has okay to a fair amount of noise. It's not super great data, so that's kind of what we have. And so I'm gonna leave it. I'm gonna leave it at default for now. You can see a default description of what all these values do. I'm still learning what they do, so I'm not really qualified to give you a super deep look into what these do. The main thing that you want to sort of look at is your power factor. If you have really good data, very low noise, you can afford to go to higher values of your power factor. So up to 200, 300 for good data. Also, if you have good data, you can do 2 passes. And so if you're going to do that, then Roger recommends that you do a higher number first and a smaller number second. So say 200 and then 50, or maybe 100 and then a 5 or 10, something like that. In this case, I'm going to try one with a power factor of 10. I think this is probably going to be too much, but we can see and just figure out whether we like what we get, and if not, we can back it off. So I'm gonna do M42 stretched power 10 as our base name, and then we just click stretch, and it's gonna do its thing. It takes a fair amount of time, so I'm gonna pause the video again and come back when it's done. Okay, so it finished, and it gave us these 2 files, and we are mostly interested in the JPEG. So let's open it up in Photoshop, or rather not in the JPEG, in the PNG, the ping. And as you can see, it looks bad, just like the last one. So we need to go back to levels. We need to do this to 128, and that's looking quite a bit better already. So what are the next steps on this? That process just took out probably an hour or more of work, and we get great color, especially if we have a less noisy image. This is a decent image, but it's only 30 subs, and it's from light polluted skies, and somewhat light polluted skies, not too bad. And yeah, so if you have better data, this is going to work even better. I said I thought we were going to have to go down to a lower power ratio, but I think that actually this doesn't look too bad. And so I think I might just keep this. So let's make this bigger. View, fit on screen. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is come over here to the eyedropper tool and get the color sampler tool. So if you hold down or you right click on one of these, you can get different options. So I'm going to check the color sampler tool, and we're going to change the sample size to a 5 by 5 average, and then we're going to put down a few sample points in background, quote unquote, parts of the image. And next, what we're going to do is come up and let's see, where do we actually see? I'm not super familiar with this version of Photoshop, so bear with me while I get this working. So there we go. Alright, so if we come to the Info tab, which you can see under View Info, we can now see our little color sampler things. So our first one is 24, 23, 22, 20, 24, 23, 24, 23, 24. That's actually pretty darn good. That's not bad at all for background values. So what we're gonna do is come to our curves, and in this version of Photoshop, you can't see a histogram overlaid on the back, but that's not too much of a problem because we are going to be getting control points by control clicking. So if you hold down control and click on a background portion of your image, you'll get a control point at that value. And if you hold down control on a piece of nebulosity that maybe is fairly dim and you want to bring out more, you'll get another control point. And then you can either click and drag these, or I like to just use the arrow keys because you're going to get more fine control and just play with them a little bit. We've already gotten quite close on this stretch, so I'm not going to do too much, and I'm just going to add a control point at the top to bring down the core a little bit. And so you can see what you've done by checking and unchecking your preview box here. So I think that's not bad. Next, I'm going to use levels and actually going to bring up the background slightly. I want to get these up to around like the 26 to 28 range. And let's see, if I come into actually curves and I pull up on this bottom point, but very slightly, so I'm actually just going to use the arrow keys until I get around the 26, 27, 28 range. So it looks like around there is going to be what I want, and hit OK. And then next, what I want to do is do a bit of sharpening. So the way I like to do that is using a high pass filter. So we're going to create a duplicate of this layer. You can do this various ways. I like to just hit Control J, and that's going to give us a duplicate. And then you come up here to Filter, Other, High Pass, and you're going to adjust this. We're going to do a couple of different levels on this. So first we're going to get the broad detail. So you want to get this to a point where it's showing you the broader detail in the image. So I think somewhere around 16 is going to be good for this object. So we're going to hit OK, and then we're going to come over here and we're going to turn the blend mode on to overlay, and that's pretty strong, but that's okay. We can we're going to adjust this later in a little bit. So then we're going to turn this off for now, and we're going to duplicate this layer again. By the way, clicking this little eyeball will turn on and off layers. Okay, so duplicate that layer again, Control J, come back up, do another high pass filter. This time we want the smaller detail, so I think I'm going to use something around a 7 pixels. Looks like it's going to be good. And pull this above the large detail and turn it onto overlay, and then turn the large detail onto overlay. Now we're going to select both of these and hit Control G, which will put them in a group. And then we can use this little opacity slider to play with the intensity of the effect. So it's pretty strong still, and I'm thinking somewhere around a 60% is probably going to be okay. The next thing we're going to do is layer mask this, because if you can see, when I turn this on and off, you might not be able to see this in video, but it is sharpening the stars in the background and the noise in the background quite a lot, which isn't necessarily something we want. And so what we're going to do is come down to this little button here. This is the layer mask button. If you alt click on that, it will give you a black layer mask. Now with layer masks, areas that are black in a layer mask will not be visible, and areas that are white will be visible. So if we click on our layer mask and then come over to the paintbrush tool, and we increase our brush size quite a lot, and we just grab white and start painting in where we want the sharpening to occur. So all around here is where I want my sharpening, and then we can also bring in some over here, And now you can see we have a lot sharper in the nebula itself without getting too much over sharpening into the background. Okay. Um, Now the next thing I'm going to do is do one more layer of gradient removal. And so I'm actually going to leave this in its own group for now, and I'm going to do my old trick of duplicate layer into its own new document. And we're going to just get this into a window form. View fit on screen. And we're going to do the same thing we did earlier, which is attempt to clone out as much of the nebulosity, or of the bright nebulosity anyway, as we can. And these bright stars are also going to have to go. And then grab this as well. Okay, that's probably about good. And we're again going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And looks like this one is really more of a general one, so we can go even higher. I'm thinking somewhere around 200 is going to be fairly decent. So we're going to go OK on that. And we're going to do again adjustments, invert, and then image adjustments, brightness contrast, and pull it. Let's go back to histogram tab, pull it down. Boom. And boom. Okay. And now we're going to come back to here, do image, apply image, and we're going to go to Untitled 1 and add. And as you can see, we've nixed a lot more of that gradient. Okay, and now I think if we go back to our info tab, our background where we sampled before was in gradient, so we need to go back and adjust that again. So I'm going to come into curves. Actually, I'm going to come into levels because we can do that fairly easily here, and pull in our black point until we're in that 28-ish range. Okay. That looks pretty good, I think. I think I'm going to do, so I'm going to come into, what I'm seeing is there's some noise in the background. It looks to me like there's quite a bit of red noise in the background. So what I'm going to do is come into levels, and not levels, into curves, and come into the red channel, and pull it over like maybe 2, maybe even just 1 on the bottom. And that's gonna pull down the reds just in the background. And so that is going to just even out the image a little bit, and then I see green creeping in because I did that. And so I'm going to come into green, grab this control point, and if it's gonna let me, I'll just type it. We're just gonna go to, like, say, I think we're gonna go to 1. And then we've neutralized the background a little bit better, I think, without affecting too much of the color within the nebula itself. And so we can click OK to that. And I think at this point, personally, I enjoy this image or this object to be oriented like so. Once it completes, hopefully. Please don't crash on me. Okay, cool. So it worked. And so at this point, I think I'm just going uh, to let's see, can I just do a flatten image? Yep, flatten image. So it's going to essentially apply the sharpening that we have just in its own layer currently. And then once it's done, okay, so I believe that's done now. I'm going to come in with the crop tool, and I think I'm just going to, or I'm not because Photoshop's being slow. We can close out of this for now. Okay, I'm going to come in with the crop tool and just crop down to about there. Okay, so I like that. So now, this next part is going to be not free, but I would highly recommend that you buy this guy's actions. They're very helpful. They're Carboni's Astro tools. So if you come up here, Astro Actions maybe I think they're called. If you come up here to Actions, you should get a window like this. And by default, you're going to have this, a thing that looks like this. So you can collapse this, and you go to this little arrow here and click Load Actions. And when you download it, you'll get a few versions. If you're using an old version, CS, you do the CS version. That's what I loaded here. If you're in Creative Cloud, the newest version, you just load the default one like that. So let me demonstrate to you what a couple of the cool things you can do with this are. So for this image, I think the ones that are going to be most valuable are, and let me just duplicate this layer so we go on to a new layer, that way we can always go back easily, are going to be our vertical banding noise reduction, because I don't know if you can tell, but there is a fair amount of vertical banding in this image. And so if I just click play on that vertical banding noise reduction, it will eventually come back, and ta-da! Almost all the vertical banding is gone, which is very, very cool. So I don't know how well you can tell in the video, but that is actually a very, very good improvement on this image in particular. So very cool there. And then the other thing we can do is a color blotch reduction. So if we run that, and we get an image that has a fair amount less blotchiness in the background color of the image, which is especially helpful in an image like this that is not or that is fairly noisy and has fairly noisy colors. So then one more thing we can do is, if I duplicate this layer again, we can run there's a couple of noise reduction routines that are included. So first I'm going to try the deep space noise reduction, and we're going to see what this gives us. And normally this is going to only apply noise reduction in very dark regions of your image and not really touch nebulosity, which is often sort of what you want. So we'll see how this comes out. And so you can see now that in the dark parts of our image, we've reduced much of the noise, and it hasn't touched the lighter parts of the image too much at all, because, and in this image that's fine because the light parts of the image didn't have too much noise in the first place. So I think that I'm going to do a back off the opacity on this just a little bit, because I think the center may have gotten a bit too much applied to it, sort of look a little bit fake. So I'm thinking that doesn't look too bad. Maybe I'll back off a little bit more to like a 50%. And I think that looks pretty good. So at this point, I'm going to do a flattened image. And now I'm going to do a really cool one that is make stars smaller. And you will see what this does when it completes. And there you go. It's a subtle effect, but it just tightens up your stars quite a good amount. And that is especially helpful when you're doing a nebula with many stars in the field. This one is slightly less noticeable, but still definitely an improvement. And I think for this image, that's all I'm going to do. So I think I'm just going to call that done. So from here in Photoshop, we can do a save as, and we're going to save it as a Photoshop document. And I'm going to change this to M42 final Photoshop, and save that. And then if you're going to save this, for a form or whatever, you can do a save for web. It's going to give you a warning. It seemed to work for me when I did it last time, so I'm just going to click OK. And then you can click up here, do an alt click to zoom out, and you can get preview. I think very high JPEG quality is often pretty darn good, and you can check a preview of how large it's going to be. So for example, the astronomy.net forum doesn't like files larger than like I think 1.9 megabytes. So this should be fine for that. And so I'll do a save, and we're just going to put this here and M42 final Photoshop .jpg. Save that, and ta-da. So let's see, let's pull up that final output. Maybe Photoshop isn't going to obstruct it. Okay, and boom. So there's what we got. Very cool, I think. And I hope you guys enjoyed. I learned a lot. I hope you learned something. And yeah,